folks a minute here. All right. So maybe we'll get started here. So welcome to the Mid-Atlantic Amateur Radio Club meeting. We're meeting on Zoom tonight because of the weather that we've had recently. So I'm Jeremy Carlo, N2 ZLQ Club President. So as usual, we'll go around with a round of intros.
Well, I'll start. This is Ron, KC3ACL, and Karen, KC3ACM, is right behind me.
Dennis, K3DS.
Barry, K3EUI, Kenneth Square.
Bob, W3PZO, Philadelphia.
Rich, AA3RC.
Lou, WX3I.
Jim, W3JNF.
Net Control, I am John Campbell, W3MHZ, Center City, Philadelphia.
Paul, KT3H.
Seth, K3YLE in Norristown.
And Seth, KJ5 OEM up in Limerick.
Anybody
Meeting
else?
tonight. This is the MARC W3JOE link repeater.
All right, did we get everybody? All right, so let's start from the top. How about Treasurer's Report, Lou?
Okay, we currently have in the bank $18,979.56. As far as I know, all bills are paid, and we've gotten some dues in, but anybody who hasn't sent in dues, please do. We currently do have 63 paid members.
Great, thanks, Lou. Let's see, public service and field day. Jim, did you have any updates, any news?
Actually, I don't have any new news. We're still looking to schedule something on the calendar for public service, probably late March, April-ish. So as details come up, I'll keep everybody posted. Field day, a little over 3 months away, so looking forward to that. I haven't heard any bad news about not getting the site, so I have to think that Lou's taking care of that for us. So that's about it for tonight.
Yeah, Lou, any update on the site access for field day?
Sorry, no, I have to. I've been a little bit remiss. I'll get that email out. Shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate any problems. I mean, we've been there for a while, and we usually take care of the place. So, looking forward to it.
Great, thanks, Jim. See, I don't see Bob Palin here. I don't know if we have any updates on the Ham Fest, but that is scheduled for August. So I guess we have to get confirmation from Kimberton about that. So I will follow up with Bob. Let's see. VE testing. We did have a session earlier this month. I don't see Brian here, but I think we did have a couple of candidates. Did anyone have a report from the VE session?
There was no VE session in February. It was canceled because of the weather.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we did cancel it. That's true. All right. And Brian actually just joined in here. So let's see. We have a breakfast coming up on February 28th. That's this upcoming Saturday. It's a great way to get to meet other club members. It's at Andy's Diner, which is on Ridge Pike in Conshohocken, basically right off it's exit 18 on the Blue Route. Basically, you can kind of fall off the highway, and it's basically right there. That's a great place to meet other club members. That'll be at 9 a.m. I think we have a board meeting coming up in about 2 weeks, so I'll have to get you an update on that. Let's see. Any other club announcements? Do we have anything else to report? Yeah. Bob, PZO, you had an announcement to make.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Many of you know me from the 13 Colonies, a special event in July, which is coming up July 1 to 7. But literally hot off the press between emails last night and some phone calls today, there is a group in Texas that is attempting to organize special event stations during the World Cup event this year, which is basically June and July. I was contacted for any interest in the Philadelphia area supporting activity as a special event. This is not involved with the Red Cross and ARES operations that are actively being planned. This would be separate as having a special event call in each of the around the dates that games are being held in our particular city. So we have them going from roughly June 12th through July 4th. And we're still getting it organized, pulling it together, but to see whether or not MARC or individual members would have interest in participating using a special event call sign, either taking a particular weekend on as a club activity or individuals signing up as with multiple clubs in the area. And since I see Rich on here, I will be contacting all the other clubs in the area to see if there's any interest along the way. Just the timing of a late-breaking phone call about 4 o'clock today and the club meeting tonight that I wanted to at least bring the idea forward that there are 6 events, 6 soccer games in Philadelphia that time period, and to be using a special event call sign probably the weekend of if it's a weekday game, and moving forward. So more details coming out to everybody, but want to at least throw the information out there. Any questions?
Yeah, Bob, maybe you could send an email out to the club reflector.
Yeah, I will. So it's all just broke in the past couple hours.
Okay.
I had a quick question for you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Did you get that email that I forwarded about the Club CUSO party?
Yeah, in fact, I was just about to call on you if you wanted to say a few words about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just looking at the email right now.
All right. A few words about the Club CUSO party. I was invited, some of you may know Scott, AA2SD, prolific POTA, VHF, UHF guy, all HF guy. Anyways, this is something that apparently has been going on for a bit, but I joined up a few months ago along with South Jersey Radio Association and K3AR Kent County, Maryland, and they've been doing this Club CUSO party. So I helped along with the getting through the rules, and it's quite the program. It's going to be the weekend before Field Day. It's also going to encourage use of the repeaters because you get points for contacts through the repeaters. Yeah, you can go check that out. And as Jeremy, you can sign up Mark for that and then send it out through the groups IO. Some of you may have seen my announcement for it on through the Philmont group. Yeah, it's pretty cool. A lot of effort's been put into it. The website is up and live with the rules and awards and logging, and just looks like a fun event that you can play from home and also play as a club call sign. So should be interesting.
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, I forwarded it out to the board. But yeah, I could send it out to the rest of the club as well. I think that'll be a good thing for us to get involved in. This thing you could participate at home. I don't know if we'd want to set up the club station because we're going to be doing that the week after.
Yeah, but I think what you can do is, well, at least my thoughts for it, I still have to, I'm actually going to call in my field day captain to help coordinate it, but it kind of would operate, I think, more like 13 colonies. We're like, okay, you know, Charlie's running, you know, Whiskey 3 EM, W3 EM, which is our club call, you know, for this period of time on this frequency, and somebody could be doing it on another band. And so that's kind of how I envisioned it, is that we would ask for volunteers and then voluntold some people to, you know, run the club call sign to get points for the club, as opposed to setting up, which, as you say, we're going to be doing the next week. So that was kind of my thought, or people just play as themselves.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, this sounds like a really cool event. I'll have to read a little bit more on the rules for it while we figure out how we can participate in it. All right. Did anyone have anything else before we move on to Barry's presentation? All right. So without further ado, we have our featured presentation tonight from Barry, one of our returning champions, a man who needs no introduction. He's been a long-time amateur radio operator and a physics educator, which is actually how I first came to know him, through the American Association of Physics Teachers. And then we kind of discovered that we were both hams. I forgot how that happened. Did we just notice the antennas on each other's cars? I think Barry,
We
you're
were at we were at Art's house, and I saw your antenna on your car.
Like, oh, you got those too. All right. Yeah, so last month I talked about visualizing signals in the time and the frequency domain. So I think Barry's going to pick up on that. So take it away.
Okay. Is my audio okay? Sound okay? I've got a mic right here, but I don't know about the gain. We're
Yeah.
okay. All right. So first, thank you for the invite to come back. It's always fun to prepare a talk, because what I usually do is think, well, what are all the things I know about that, and try to find out some new things, put together a slideshow, and I usually end up like with 100 slides, everything I can think of. Then I got to pare it down. Probably not a smart thing to do to save time. So I thought, well, what would be useful to know for a ham radio club about modulation and seeing it? And Jeremy's talk kind of reviewed the two ways you can view as a graph or a live monitor. You can look at a signal in the time domain. That's usually what we call an oscilloscope view. So you're looking at the strength of a signal versus time. It's always fun to do that. And I remember as a kid finding out what an oscilloscope was and borrowing one and looking at everything I could imagine that was some sort of a wave, including the 120 volt AC outlet, which got me in a little trouble. The other way you can look at a signal, though, is in, as Jeremy describes, the frequency domain. That is, what frequencies carry a given amount of RF energy, and then display the intensity of the energy versus frequency rather than time. Now you can do that as an audio signal, and that's easy to do, but I thought, let's look at it from the RF point of view. I don't own a spectrum analyzer, I mean a real good one, but what I did do, and I should have gotten some slides, I have a little, it's the size of my fist, it's called a RSP Pro, I think it was from England. It's about the size of my fist, and it plugs into the USB socket of any computer, and it kind of dissects as a software-defined radio. And I can use software for that and listen to stations all over the world on AM, FM, whatever. But I also have software that allows me to do a little bit more specifically to look at the RF in much finer detail, but not demodulate it and listen to it. So Jeremy was showing you last month, I think it was WWV at 15 megahertz, and you could see on the waterfall, as it's called, That's a frequency domain, but then the waterfall, and you look at it as time goes on. And you could see, even if you couldn't hear, the carrier of WWV at 15 megahertz. Then you could see both on the left and right sideband of that, an on and off signal, a beeping, the 600 or 500 hertz audio tone. All right, so let's start. And if you have a question, don't wait till the end, because then it wouldn't kind of make sense. But I'm not going to watch the chat because I can't do 3 things at once here. So if you have a question, just unmute and call it out, if that's okay. All right, so first let me show you. Here's my RSP. Do you guys see what I see here? The RSP spectrum analyzer?
I don't think I see it.
I might have to. Right here, I'm moving it back and forth. All right, so maybe I have to close some other windows or just minimize them.
I see a plot with a yellow line on it.
Well, it says 14766 up here.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So here's the Spectrum Analyzer app called RSP Spectrum Analyzer. It was free. And I'm tuned right now to 14766, and here I've got to be real careful. This is connected to an antenna out in my yard that's a 17-meter vertical. I don't want it too close to my actually 2-meter antenna, or I'll overload this and burn it out. And I did the first one. I bought playing with it and not being too careful. So right now we're looking at a 20 kilohertz RF spectrum, and it's centered on 14766. And of course the reason for that is that's the input to the repeater. So I'm going to come over here with another program and press tune and see if you see hopefully what I'm going to show you. There, it's coming up. Do you guys see this? Do you see this display here? Oh, Jeremy says yes. Okay.
We do.
So this is a single tone, 1500, 1.5 kilohertz audio, injected into an ICOM 706 behind me. It's a pretty old radio. And I'm transmitting a 147660, about 5 watts or something. So I'm not getting into the repeater, I hope, because I don't have the PL tone turned on. So a single tone, look at this odd thing. Let me turn it off. And it's that was a digital tone. What?
The repeater did come up for a second, but it may have just been something else.
Oh, I may have had the PL tone turned on. I hope not. I'm going to just key the radio. No, the PL tone is definitely not on. So, and I don't want to talk. So just look at the RF display here. Let me minimize this. I've got too many windows here. So do you guys see this? Right at 14766, there's a strong peak. Now I'm going to talk and you'll see my voice. Here's my voice coming out on 14766, test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I'll be quiet. And I just unkeyed. Did you guys see what I saw then? It dropped to 0. Let me bring up a zoom and we'll talk about what this all was about. Okay. Do you see what I see now, the slideshow? We're good? Okay. Let me go to slideshow. All right. So I wasn't sure that would work because I was on 14766 simplex without the PL tone. And I wanted to see what was my signal output from the radio, not coming out of the repeater. All right, so fundamentals of modulation. Here we go. So I thought, well, there's 2 things that would be useful to do for a radio club. Modulation, what is it? How does it work? And Jeremy pretty much covered that. So I kind of go through that pretty quickly without trying to overlap what Jeremy did. And then how do we see modulation, look at modulation, in terms of an audio and an RF spectrum? And that depends, of course, on whether my transmitter is on AM or sideband or FM. So let's see if I can show you some slides of this. So, as Jeremy mentioned, modulation just means you're changing some feature of the carrier wave, and we can change the amplitude, hence AM. We could change the frequency, FM. We can change the phase, phase modulation. All of these can be superimposed, mixed with a FM signal, and you can carry information like a human voice or digital signal or whatever. And I think we've probably all seen these. It's part of the, the testing. So if you start out with some sort of a simple sine wave audio signal, so here's an AM, an amplitude modulated audio signal, feed it into an FM transmitter, what comes out is a signal whose frequency changes depending on the modulation here. The deviation, the increase or decrease in the frequency here, the FM deviation, proportional to the amplitude of that signal. It's a little easier, I think, for me at least, to visualize. What if you superimpose the audio on an AM transmitter? Then what you end up with is a carrier and two sidebands. And Jeremy showed what that was all about. If you look at it in the time domain, you see an RF signal. That's the quick up and down bumps here. But you see the envelope changing up and down, and it's the envelope that carries the AM signal. Don't want to go into the mathematics because that gets really messy, but if we have a message, it's called, a sine wave, an audio whistle into the mic, and then we have some sort of a carrier, what you find is on AM, the carrier stays put, but you get these additional sidebands that contain power, so the envelope grows and collapses, and you hope it collapses to zero or close to zero and grows to some, and that's considered high-level modulation, like 100% modulation. That's pretty easy to do on a basic, simple radio. When I was a kid, I built a Heathkit DX100, and that was an AM radio. I was actually a novice, and it was about twice as much power as a novice was supposed to use, but I had fun with that thing. Then an AM signal is quite a bit different from an FM signal, and an FM, what you're changing is the angle of the modulation here, and what ends up coming on the antenna is frequencies that vary depending on the modulation. And that's what I'd like to show you the picture of without getting into the mathematics. So phase modulation. I tried to explain phase modulation at many talks, and I realized it's hard for me because I'm not sure I understand it exactly. But here's one way I think we can use as an analogy, an analog of phase modulation. So picture this guy with two flags, and he only has two flags. He never has one flag, but he can move these flags to different positions, straight up, down, over here, change the angle. But he always has two flags. He never has one. He never has no flags. So you can imagine that you can move these around to all these angles. Is that a nice way of visualizing what phase modulation is? The information is changing where the starting and ending position are. At least this is shown with two flags, flag modulation. Does that give anyone a glimpse of what's meant by phase? The amplitude's not changing, the color's not changing, the only thing changing is position. All right, I'll let that go. One of the most popular types of phase modulation in the 1990s was called PSK31, invented by, was it Peter Martinez? And that was the kick back in the 90s. If you could get a sound card and get on PSK31 with just a couple watts and a simple antenna, you could work the world. It was so efficient. So in phase modulation, what you're doing is changing the phase, and you can see if you look carefully here, the wave is collapsing, and then there's a little phase change right there. This is also changing the amplitude, so phase modulation should really be called phase and amplitude modulation. I wrote to the author of this, Peter Martinez, when I was trying to figure out how it all worked, and I said, why does the amplitude have to change? And he said, actually it doesn't, but if you change the phase while it was at the peak power, you'd splatter all over the band, and no one would appreciate that. So the reason for changing the phase when the amplitude drops, you might say the signal knows there's a phase change, so the amplitude drops, and the phase change takes place here where there's very little power. So it's an odd looking, so we're looking at time on the horizontal, and we're looking at energy coming out on the antenna on the vertical. So a 1 might be no phase change, and a 0 might be a phase change. Anyway, it's a way to send ones and zeros. Very, very popular. The software that came out, I forget what that was called back in the 90s. I should remember the name. But there's all kinds of software now that can decode PSK31. The only problem with PSK31 is now what? What's the problem? Nobody's on that mode anymore. I hardly ever hear it. Everyone's on the FT8 and FT4 WSJT modes. But it's a fantastic way. You can use a very narrow sliver of bandwidth. It's something like 50 hertz wide. 1 watt and a decent antenna, you can work the world. Here's what it looks like as, now what kind of view is this? This is the audio spectrum of PSK31. And what we're looking at here is frequency on the x-axis and energy amplitude on the y-axis. So here's a PSK31 signal. There's 2 tones because this signal is changing back and forth 31 times a second. There's 31 baud. And the sidebands that it generates are way down here, so it's a very narrow signal. And it sounds sort of like a warbling sound. Dennis, you had a question or comment?
Well, I did a quick AI search in Google, and it was called Digipan. That was the name of the software.
Digipan, yes. I remember using that on, Windows 3 or something, whatever it was. Thank you. Digipan, yeah. So PSK31, it's just an amazing mode. It's much faster than CW. It's narrower than CW. 50 words a minute. I can't copy 50 words a minute CW. So it should have really kind of demolished CW. And it didn't because, of course, CW can copy without a computer. But that's what it looks like. So someone had the idea, pretty brilliant, instead of sending one carrier and PSK modulate it, why not multiple carriers? Multiple carriers, if they start out in a sound card, they start out with more than one sound, and each sound is independently phase shift keyed. So multiple PSK. What's meant by carrier? Carrier is sort of like, how do I describe carrier? It's not the RF carrier, it's the sounds on a sound card that are coming out in parallel. Like you can whistle one tone. I heard Jeremy try to do that. We couldn't hear. But you could whistle with a train whistle, 2 tones. So what if you had 10 tones simultaneously phase shift keyed? That means what? You can carry more information. But the downside is it's going to carry more and more bandwidth in order to get that information. So here's and I just said the slides I'm making here were produced by a 20-year-old ICOM 706, receiving it with an SDR Play hardware, and SDR. Oh, I'm not using SDR Console tonight though, but that's another software package. All right, so let's look at this. Here's PSK20. What does that mean? Well, it's phase shift keyed, but there's 20 individual sounds. So picture 20 people whistling all at the same baud, but on and off, on and off. So this thing can carry a lot of information. What we're looking at here, again, is the frequency domain on a waterfall. So these numbers are audio frequencies. So it's usually centered around 1500 hertz, kind of a mid-range audio pitch. And it goes down to around, 600 hertz and up to about 2300 hertz. So this thing takes a bandwidth, an audio bandwidth. There you go. That's pretty wide. But the advantage is you can send a lot of information, and it's very, very robust. And this is like having 20 Sherman tanks on a hillside all firing. Here's what it would look like as an audio spectrum with a mode called MT63, and Montgomery County, Erie, still uses this. MT63 is actually 64 carriers. I don't know why it's called MT63. I would think MT64. Anyway, there's 64 Sherman tanks on the hill, and each one's firing. So all of these different carriers are at slightly different frequencies, and you can see them right here. So again, this is an audio spectrum of the mode called MT63. I can, at the end of this, show you what it sounds like over the repeater, but I have the repeater offset right now. 64 carriers, each with a very low baud PSK modulation, like 10 or 20 baud. Perfectly legal and very, very robust. It cuts through noise very easily. As I said, Montgomery County uses it on their 2-meter Aries Races nets. Jeremy mentioned this, and I thought, let's come back in something, because I remember when I was a kid, I used to hear this, oh, that's a dead carrier, meaning there was no AM phone modulation. So someone was tuning up with a carrier, and we used to say, oh, that's a dead carrier. It's a carrier without modulation, so that's what a dead carrier is. What would that look like? So here's a couple of shots I got with the software and hardware. So here's 145. I used 14569 because it's a simplex frequency. I'm not bothering anybody. And I set my little radio behind me here to like 5 watts, and this SDR software picked up right here a huge spike of energy, 20 over 9, that's 9 plus 20, and it's centered on 14569. So here's the carrier. It's not necessarily dead, but there's no audio on it. There's a couple of other junky things down here, but these are way deep in the noise, and it's a 20-year-old radio, so I guess it's got some spurs here or something. So no modulation. Well, that's not very interesting. Let's modulate it now with a some sort of a voice. Let's say a human voice and a microphone. So what happens on AM is the carrier doesn't budge. The carrier power stays fixed at whatever you have, 10 watts, 20 watts, 30 watts. But when you talk, that added modulation power gets added to the carrier at either the lower or upper sideband. I don't remember this, it was on one of those early tests. I think if you add up the power in the sidebands, it's like 25% of the carrier power, or maybe it's 50%, 25% on lower and 25% or something like that. But the carrier stays put. So what's the purpose of the carrier? Well, the carrier just identifies, your VFO dial frequency if you're listening to this. It also means the receiver can be very simple. The signal carrier is sent along with the modulation, so a simple receiver can decode this, demodulate it. So that's what Jeremy was showing. This is a frequency domain. F sub C is the frequency of the carrier. And then you have an upper sideband and a lower sideband. And this thing is as wide as the audio. Let's say you have a 3 kilohertz audio bandwidth. So your information is in the upper sideband, or your information's in the lower sideband. They're really kind of redundant, except here on lower sideband, the low bass part of your frequencies are down here, and the higher parts of your frequencies are up here. But look, this is a lower RF frequency. So one of the things that puzzled me as a kid, when sideband was coming out in the late 1950s, I had a radio and I could set the receiver to upper sideband, and I listened on 80 and 40 meters, and I could hear voices, but I could never decode it. It was just garbled, terribly garbled. But when I switched to lower sideband, I could hear their voice. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. If there's a lower sideband and an upper sideband, I ought to be able to listen to either one of them and get the full audio, like AM. And it doesn't work that way. So kind of interesting. The high frequencies on the lower sideband are at a lower RF frequency, and the higher frequencies on the upper sideband are at a higher RF frequency. So they're kind of inverted signals, if that's the proper word. Okay, so a couple questions. So what would it look like if I wanted to check the RF spectrum for an AM signal at some, I think I'm going to use 14569 megahertz, 2 meter simplex. I'm going to modulate an AM signal with a 1 kilohertz audio tone, sort of like whistling into the mic, which is essentially what Jeremy was showing. So here's what that looks like. 14569, there's the carrier. So it's still there. I'm on AM. But if my radio's on FM, this spectrum analyzer picks up a signal up here at 14569 plus 1500 hertz. So add, and you get this. It's a single tone, but it's offset by the carrier by 1500 hertz. Here's another tone, equal in size, just about, and it's 1500 hertz, 1.5 kilohertz below the carrier. But notice the carrier's still there. Why is the carrier there? Because in AM, you send out a carrier plus the modulation. The danger of AM, and I knew this as a kid, if you turn the audio gain up too high, where you shout into the microphone, you generate all kinds of what the hams back then called splatter. Signals that were just almost garbled and took up a lot of space on the radio dial, and you were lit if you sent a bad AM signal. And I was real careful not to over-modulate my DX100. I was on 40 meters or 80 meters back then. So this is pretty simple, straightforward. Carrier, lower sideband, upper sideband, single tone. Now, I purposely, on this case, with my rig, I turned up the audio to purposely over-modulate, and here's what it shows. There's still a carrier, and here's the 1500, but here's all these other tones. This is the splatter, the junk, and it made the signal very wide, very garbled, and if I actually sent this with, 10 watts on AM on 80 meters, people would complain that's a lousy signal. But I wanted to show you this is an RF spectrum, 14569, the carrier. So these are the upper sidebands, these are the lower sidebands. And they're pretty symmetric, aren't they? So this is an AM signal that's equal power on the lower and the upper sideband. That would be a lousy signal to listen to. Okay, so now on the ICOM 706, I switch it to upper sideband, and I still put in a 1 kilohertz audio tone. And here's what that looks like. Whoops. Here's the carrier frequency, and there's nothing there, or very little there. There's very little lower sideband. There's a couple other things here, but that's way down in the weeds. Look at this. A huge spike of RF at 14569 plus 1 kilohertz. So it's modulating at 1 kilohertz, not 1.5 kilohertz. So there's an upper sideband signal. The lower sideband is suppressed. What does that mean? Well, it's missing. So does that make sense? If I send a 1 kilohertz audio tone, like whistling, in my rig on upper sideband, all I get is one RF wave, right? This is RF. But it's 1 kilohertz above my VFO. So the carrier is whatever my VFO dial is set for. Make sense? Okay. How about if I switch my radio to lower sideband? Well, it's the same idea, isn't it? Except the radio somehow magically throws in a lower sideband. Here's the carrier, 14569. It's way down here, still missing. And again, this is a 20-year-old radio. And here's the lower sideband, a big spike, just 1 kilohertz below 14569. And some other garbage way out here. So, that was probably nothing new to anybody, correct? That's kind of a quick review. I see Jeremy nodding. So, how about if I put my 1 kilohertz tone into an FM radio? Now, if you had asked me 10 or 20 years ago, what would the spectrum look like? I would have no idea, absolutely no idea. I mean, my background's in physics and stuff, but I never thought about that. If my radio is a frequency modulated, whether it's frequency or phase, I don't care, and you throw in a sine wave, what will that look like? Does anyone have a visualization of that? So here's what my spectral analyzer shows. I'm still on 14569. So there is a carrier right here, 14569. My VFO dial is set for 14569, but my rig is set for FM modulation. Now, I'm not feeding the audio into the mic jack. I could have, but that's kind of coarse. I'm feeding the audio into a little data jack in the back of the ICOM 706. So I have a sound card. All right, so what in the world is this? Well, here's the original 14569 carrier. It's still there, but there's now a tone here and here and here and all these other tones. This doesn't make sense. I feed one tone into the modulator, and when I look at the RF spectrum, I see like a dozen tones here, and each tone's at a different frequency. Remember, this is an RF spectrum analyzer. So horizontally, we're looking at frequency. So my center frequency, 14569, and I'm looking at a bandwidth of 20 kilohertz. So from the left to the right side here, 20 kilohertz. So my signal's what? Maybe 10 kilohertz wide, so I'm sort of legal. But why all these other tones here? Can anyone unmute and give me a quick explanation? Why does one tone in produce many tones out on an FM transmitter? I'll stop talking.
I think Professor Bessel would have the best answer.
Dennis, okay. Well, so the Bessel curves, yeah. W3KZ had a comment or an answer. I'm sorry, your audio is a little garbled. Say it again.
From KSSN. Hey, Anthony. Got your email, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, so I'm hearing someone. Are you all hearing that? I'm hearing a conversation on a radio.
Yeah, I thought you would want to see that.
W3KZ? I'll have to go back and mute W3KZ.
Jeremy, maybe you can mute that user.
W3KZ, the audio is feeding through, yeah. All right, so let's come back to this. So, yeah, Dennis's explanation involves a mathematical interpretation by a guy named Bessel and Bessel curves. I don't want to stop here and delay this, but I'm still thinking, how do I explain this to like a fourth grader or something? I understand a little bit about Bessel curves, the mathematics. So one tone in on a frequency modulated transmitter produces multiple, in fact, an infinite number of tones output. I'll stop there because this was really a surprise. One tone in, multiple tones out, not on AM, but on FM, and not on sideband. Well, let's keep going here. So what happens to the RF spectrum if I use multiple pitches but sent one at a time? So something like radio teletype RTTY goes DD, DD, DD. They're never both on at the same time. That's the DTMF tone. CW goes on and off, but RTTY has two tones, and there's always one tone or the other, but not two at the same time. So if I sent a RTTY signal, what would the RF spectrum look like? Or what if I send just multiple tones, one at a time? DT, 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 DT. There are a number of digital modes like Thor, Olivia, MFSK that use 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 tones, but only one tone at a time. So if you listen to a RTTY signal, DD, DD, DD. If you listen to a Thor signal, DD, 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 DD. And all of that is modulation. So what happens if I want to look at the spectrum of a transmitter sending one of these? This was kind of interesting. Thor is an unbelievably effective mode. Who wouldn't want to use a mode like Thor with a name like that? So Thor is 18 tones. The reason why 18 instead of 16, a multiple of 2, 18 is because when the tone changes, it changes by at least 2 pitches. So picture a piano keyboard. You have to jump at least 2 white keys each time if you want to change. Thor uses what's called incremental frequency shift keying, IFSK. And the information is not in the pitch of the sound, but in the change of pitch from one sound to the next. So it's the change in pitch or frequency from one tone to the next tone in time. That determines whatever character you're sending. Thor also has other things that make it really cool, like what's called forward error correction. I want to go into that. Thor has a second channel where you can just put in your name or your QTH. And Thor can send small images, which is fun. So let's take a look at some Thor RF spectrum. Oops, I goofed here. So here's Thor looking at it like an oscilloscope. So here's Thor 22. That is the 22. It's 22 baud. 22 changes per second. Equivalent speed for like typing, 78 words a minute. That's really fast. I can't type that fast. A bandwidth of a little over 500 hertz. Oh, that's reasonable. That's a little wider than a CW signal. Nearly constant amplitude. F1B means it's a frequency shift. Do, 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 do. And if you look at the oscilloscope view, all these peaks, remember this is RF frequency, all these peaks, oh, this is time, I'm sorry. Here's a time domain. They're all about the same, so the amplitude of the signal isn't changing. Only the frequency, the tone. Do, 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 do. Here it is as an audio spectrum. So now we're looking at the horizontal axis as audio frequency, not radio frequencies. So this is the kind of thing that would come out of, let's say, my speaker. So Thor 22, here's the signal demodulated and coming to my speaker. So if you look closely here, there are a couple little bumps. There's the individual tones. And the way this is produced, as Jeremy mentioned, this is produced by looking over a scan of frequencies and saying, how often is a frequency here or here or here? This is called an FFT, a frequency Fourier transform. It's essentially looking at what pitches are in this signal. And it has to look at that over a certain time element in order to figure the stuff out. Real spectrum analyzer are real cool with the way they work. This is a little more primitive. So this is the audio spectrum of Thor. Oh, okay. It has these deep wings, which is sort of like the way it tapers off. But most of the energy is up here. And then the bars are 10 dB apart. So this is like 20 decibels down. You probably wouldn't hear 30 dB down. Nice signal. This is, again, audio. If we look at the radio frequency, the RF, so now I tune my spectrum analyzer to 14569. Okay, here's the carrier. Remember, I'm on FM. FM always has a carrier. But look at this little bump of information. And it's over here. So whatever this is, it's part of my modulated signal. But here it is again, a little bit suppressed. So if you go down, that's lower energy. 10 dB per block here. And it's a little wider. If you go down, so the first sideband, second, third sideband here, it's quite a bit wider. but a lot less energy. Fourth, fifth. So I stopped about here. So this is a signal, not a single whistle, but a signal called Thor that's multiple tones, but only one tone sent at a time. That's important. It's not like, an orchestra where 15 instruments are playing at the same time. At any time, there's only one piece of energy. We still have a carrier, right? The carrier didn't disappear yet. Here's another called Thor 22. It's just switching faster. It's 22 baud. It's still 18 tones, one at a time. And I'm still sending this on one. It's a fuzzy slide, but 1, 4, 5, 6, 9. And again, you see there's some information here that's the modulation. There's no information at the carrier. Here's the information. Here's the information. Here's the information. Here's the information. So I think even on FM, I think these are called still called sidebands, but they work a little differently from the way AM sidebands work. The carrier still here. Okay, here's one that has many, many tones, MFSK 128, and it's still one tone at a time, and I'm still sending this on a frequency up here, 14569. So this image shows the radio frequencies coming on my spectrum analyzer around 14569, but I'm looking over here 20 kilohertz. So I'm looking 10 kilohertz above the carrier, 10 kilohertz below, and here's my signal. It ramps up. This is louder up here. Still has a carrier. First sideband, second, third, they kind of merge here. All the modulation is here. There's no modulation or there's no information at the carrier frequency. So all the information in this signal, whatever it is frequency dependent here. Does that kind of make sense? So in FM, the modulation is in the frequency domain, not in the amplitude domain. And in fact, here you see the RF carriers. Well, pretty much the same. It might be changing a little bit, but it's still there. There was a QST article. I'll just mention this because I fell for it. There was a QST article about 10 years ago, and it showed a brand new kind of modulation. Now, we used to have AM, then we had single sideband. And in single sideband, you delete the carrier. That's great. And in the 1960s, everyone was slowly switching over, if you could afford it, to get a sideband transmitter. Much, much more efficient than AM. So now here we are with FM. So this QST article was all about a new mode that was developed where it's FM with the carrier removed, so you don't have to waste power on the carrier. And I read that, and it was in QST, and I thought, I don't get it. In frequency modulation, the carrier's moving left and right. You can't eliminate the carrier on FM. But this article showed how you do it. And then I looked at the front of the issue, and it was April. April, whatever it was, 2010 or something. It was a while back. And I thought, oh, you idiot, you fell for it. Every once in a while, QST in their April issue would put an article that was their April Fool's article. And man, did I fall for it.
Barry?
Yes.
You're saying that you're not supposed to be able to remove the carrier in FM?
Right. Well, I'll put it this way. The way the article is describing it, the carrier is always gone. So in my next slide, I'll show you. In my next slide, I'll show you how that actually happens.
Okay. All right, you're going to show my index then.
So the question really, Dennis, is what's the function of the carrier at the VFO frequency? And here's where you get into kind of a...
Mathematically, it's what carries the signal if you look at the analytical.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. So does this make sense so far? We still have a carrier. It might be subdued a little bit. So on AM, I think Jeremy mentioned this. On AM, the carrier, if it's 100 watts, as you add modulation, it's still 100 watts. It's not 50 or 80% of the power. It's still full power on the carrier. The sidebands add power, which means your power output is much more than it would be on CW, because what you're essentially doing is adding the lower sideband power, the upper sideband power, to your AM signal. So a 100-watt transmitter might actually be putting out on voice peaks 150 watts. I proved that because I took the output of my DX100 and I put it through some coax to a light bulb on the outside of my room. So folks knew in my shack in my home that if Barry was on the air and talking, this light bulb was lighting up. Don't open the door. All right, long story. So MFSK is also a cool mode because you can send small images, small size images. So this was a bunch of years ago, my grandson, and I sent this out over 2 meter FM as a MFSK slow scan image. All right, so here's a human voice, and I can do this live. Here's carrier. Oh, and I'm up here on 446520. That's the Chester County Aries Races repeater. And these bumps here, this is the PL tone that I need to get into the repeater of 100 hertz. But as I'm shouting in the microphone, hello, or CQ, look, all of this voice energy is over here over a wide range of frequencies. So this is a human voice sort of shouting something or other. From 300 to about 3,000 hertz, whatever my mic was on the FM rig. Here's 8PSK 500F, another digital mode. And here you can see the carrier, 446525 with a PL tone. And here's the actual modulation, here, and here, and here, and here. So far, this is not surprising. The modulation is to the left and right of the frequency domain. Which means what? The more modulation, the wider the bandwidth, the wider the signal. And I think we're told, we have some limit as hams on our FM transmitters in terms of the bandwidth of our signals or the deviation of our signals. There's something else called quadrature modulation, which is a little more complicated, where you're changing more than one thing at once, like the amplitude and the phase. I don't want to talk about that tonight. So here's an FM transmitter, and I'm using, instead of my voice, the digital mode called Vera FM. Vera FM is very popular because now it's the WinLink mode. So I'm sending a Vera FM signal out over, this is a different frequency here. And look, all of these sidebands are kind of merging here. All the power is here and here. There's still a little bit of a carrier, a 145. I'm on 14567 now. All right, so here's the deal. And maybe Dennis can explain this because I can't. So if you start out with an FM radio and your VFO is on this frequency and you just key the mic, you get power there. If you have a little bit of audio at, let's say, 1 kilohertz, you have a little speck of energy here. If you're still 1 kilohertz audio but make it louder, these specks get bigger. Now this is the frequency domain, frequency. So a louder signal, the signal comes up. More audio, a louder signal, I'm still at 1 kilohertz audio. And look what happens here. More and more sidebands, more and more sidebands. But look, here's where the carrier was, and look, the carrier just dropped. Here the carrier is most of the energy, about half the energy. And here the carrier is actually less, the amplitude, than the audio. Whoops, and look down here. The carrier is starting to disappear. How does the carrier disappear if we're modulating the carrier? So you see my problem. So there is a carrier, but it's no longer at the original VFO frequency. It's been moved left and right. And I think Jeremy explained this to me. As you look at this over some time interval, you find that the signal is very rarely at the original VFO frequency. The signal is above or it's below. So the modulation is spreading out in frequencies, right? And the carrier is being diminished. So in FM, as you add modulation, here's the catch. The carrier goes down. The carrier power becomes modulation power. That does not happen on AM, but it does happen on FM. Did I get that right, Dennis? It's a little hard to explain.
Well, I don't think the one thing that you said was that it gets louder. Or the amplitude never changes. So
I mean the loudness of the sound.
No,
I can shout in a mic and you hear it more than if I whisper on FM.
Well, what you're doing is you're increasing the modulation index is what you're doing.
Yes, but if you look at the spectrum, wouldn't the spectrum show that as more sidebands when I shout?
You look at it in the time domain, the amplitude never changes.
Yes, but we're looking at here in the frequency domain.
In the frequency domain, yes, you see these kinds of spectrum.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to show.
All you see is just a constant.
Yes, correct. So in other words, the modulation power comes at the expense of the carrier power. Did I say that correctly?
Well, this is what they call the single tone solution. By the way, it's the only one you can. It's the only one
I can't do a multiple tone.
That's right. There is no analytical solution for more than one tone, which is what Bessel found out.
All right.
So it turns out that there's a setting called the modulation index, which is This is the Bessel function to go to 0,
Yep,
which
that's my next 3 slides.
okay. All yours.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I can explain it in words as much as when I see it. Okay, so we all know when we pick up an FM radio and we talk, it's called FM for a reason. The modulation is changing the frequency of the RF wave. There is an RF wave there. The deviation, and that's a technical term, the deviation of an FM signal turns out how far the signal moves in frequency is proportional to the amplitude of the audio. So here it gets a little confusing. If I shout into the mic more audio, the deviation gets wider, and the bandwidth of the signal gets bigger. So what's called narrow bandwidth FM, we're supposed to be no more than a 5 kilohertz deviation on our radios. And most of the commercial radios fix it so you can't overmodulation. The radio just stops, it cuts out. And the average for the digital modes is like 2 or 3 kilohertz deviation. So this term deviation, I know it's on tests and everything, but I didn't really understand it until I started to really think about it. The FM carrier moves left and right depending on the audio. Louder audio, it moves farther to the right or farther to the left, but it doesn't make the signal on the antenna any more powerful. Did I get that right? I think so. In other words, if I'm talking on an FM radio and look at a power meter, it always reads 20 watts, 30 watts, whatever. If I stop talking, it's still 30 watts. If I shout, it's still 30 watts. So on FM, the power is going into the side bands here on the FM. Okay. So deviation is related to what Dennis just called modulation index, another buzzword, and I better stop here because we're just about out of time here. The deviation is what counts. Then the deviation can be measured by the product of 2 things. The modulation index, essentially how loud I'm talking, and the audio frequency. Now my voice has lots of frequencies. So if we use a single tone, as Dennis mentioned, a single tone, let's say 1.5 kilohertz, a whistle, and we whistle louder and louder and louder, we're not changing the audio frequency, that's still the frequency of my whistle, but we're changing what's called the modulation index. Modulation index, how do I see that? So here I can see it by what are called Bessel curves. And I don't want to spend time on this other than if I don't have any audio, I have a carrier, and it's, let's say here, 100%. As I add audio, the carrier starts to drop in power. That is, the sidebands swipe the energy from the carrier, and in fact down here, there's a magic number where if the modulation index is 2.5, the carrier, my VFO frequency, is 0 energy. All the energy is to the left and right of the carrier. I had to stop and think about that. I see a graph, and I know who Bessel is, and I can talk about who Bessel was, but these Bessel curves are quite a bit fancy mathematics. You find that as you add more and more modulation, you get more and more sidebands. So as you talk louder, as the modulation index goes up, you get a second sideband, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. And at a couple of points here, the carrier, that's in red, I think, the carrier is 0 here, and also 0 here, and 0 here. So if you were to use a single tone, not a human voice, and gradually increase the audio, and that's what I wanted to do live, you find at some audio level, the carrier disappears. The carrier frequency disappears. So if I'm listening on 145.706, there's nothing there. All the information's a little above and below. Now my radio knows that, my radio can detect it, and my radio can pick up other stations talking on FM, obviously. But the original energy on my VFO frequency nulls. So this is called the carrier null. Here's an example of it right here. So here I'm back on 14569, just a 2 meter simplex frequency. Obviously I don't want to do this on a repeater. And I increase the audio, and it was just, what did I say here, a 1500 hertz audio signal. Here's 14569. Here's where the carrier is supposed to be, and here's where it is. So the carrier is about 40 dB below intensity, where it should be. If I stop the audio, this bar would come right back up. How does that happen? How do I see no energy at my original VFO frequency? Here I relax the audio so it's not so loud, and here's my carrier, and here's the first sideband at the same level as the carrier. So the carrier hasn't disappeared, and this is a more moderate level of modulation called a modulation index of 1.5. If I go back to the slide here, here's 1.5 modulation index, And that means my carrier drops, that's the red, to the same intensity as the first sideband, right here. And I can see that if I just have a single tone going into an FM radio and with a spectrum analyzer, look at what's on 14569. I better stop there because I think we're going over. When Dennis was showing slides and talking about time domain, and he had some nice computer programs and even apps on his phone that would do that. The little device I'm using is sitting here on my desk, and it's about the size of my fist. And I've had it for like 5 years. There are even smaller ones. But it's called an SDR, a software-defined radio. It has an antenna jack, USB jack, and that's it. And everything that I use to manipulate the radio is in software. So I'm thinking the first radio I had was an SX28. It was the big box here with 18 vacuum tubes and 50 dials and generated 200 watts of heat. I had so much fun with that because there were so many dials I could mess with. I borrowed it from a friend of mine.
Barry, I got a Christmas present for you.
An SX28.
No, even better now. How about a spectrum analyzer you can hold in your hand?
Oh, well, I've got the SDR, and with the software, so it's like a VNA, yeah.
It's based on a VNA design. It's called a Tiny Spectrum Analyzer.
I've heard about those. Yes.
This is version 1. I'm looking at WMGK FM right now on just a whip. This is version 1, and they're trying to get rid of them for like $50, which is really a good deal.
Who's they? They are.
Look at eBay.
Okay. As I look at it, I've got the same little box that's about 6-7 years old, but it's called a
vector network
analyzer. A nano vector network analyzer. I think a couple of years ago.
It's the same architecture. They just rewrote the software.
So on the surface there is a little screen where you don't need the computer. Well, let me stop because I could talk about this stuff for an hour, and I'm at the stage where I think I almost understand FM. And as Dennis said, there's no solutions if you have like a human voice. And the solutions for even a single pitch, I'm still struggling with that because when the carrier disappears, the carrier nulls, that means is this correct, Jeremy? Over the time that I'm making my FFT, there's no energy at the original VFO frequency. Did I say that correctly?
I guess it's right. So for a single tone, it's like you're spending no time at the original carrier frequency.
Yes. In other words, the original carrier frequency, there's nothing there. All the information's a little above and a little below.
Well, let's give homage to who actually, besides Bessel, which only did a mathematical.
Armstrong.
And here's an avatar picture of Edwin Armstrong.
Yeah,
he's the one that actually figured this all out.
Dennis, when you teach this at, like for engineers.
No, that's the other thing I want to tell you. Once upon a time, the course for seniors was called Analog and Digital Communication. We dropped the analog part altogether, and we teach just digital communication now. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
There's maybe like a half an hour you talk about AM and FM and broadcast, and after that you just move on.
See, FM, AM I grew up with as a kid because I built the radio and I understand CW, AM. And AM, if you shout into the microphone, the carrier ignores it. The carrier is always there. You can't get rid of the carrier on AM. But on sideband, little magic circuits, the carrier is nulled. You suppress the carrier. Then you suppress one of the sidebands, and then all you have is the upper sideband or the lower sideband. Why can't you do that on FM? Eliminate the carrier. That was the April QST article.
Okay. Now, the April QST article I liked was the 40-meter dipole, which was 2 Ford station wagons pointed butt to butt. You would load them up and make a 40-meter dipole out of them.
Wow, on good insulated tires, huh?
Yeah.
Alrighty, so I know the talk's usually about an hour, and I don't want to go over. And I hear there's someone talking tonight on multiple channels in the Congress.
Oh yeah, we're gonna miss that.
Yeah. All right, so I'll stop. Any questions, comments? I sent Jeremy the whole slide, much more than I used. So if you want, you could post those on any web page that you guys use for MARC. But I better stop there.
What if the modulation index goes above 2.4? Because it looks like the amplitude goes negative.
Yeah, you can do that. It generates more and more wider sidebands. And to talk about negative modulation
It
index. I
doesn't
had to
matter
think about
because
that.
it doesn't matter because the spectrum is the magnitude function. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
So it's going to be the square. So it goes
Yeah,
positive
exactly
again.
right.
Yeah,
So
but I think I'm right. More louder modulation, doesn't it make the signal bandwidth greater, Dennis? It starts to distort. Or there's a reason why the FCC said, look, FM users, you have a bandwidth of whatever it is, 20 kilohertz for
you're
repeaters.
supposed to, and we have to do this here on our repeaters. We have to make sure that no possible signal exceeds the bandwidth that we're supposed to be running at.
Right,
So
or you'd spill over to other repeaters.
exactly. So we have to set up the modulation index, and there's a little pod in there which is basically controlling. It's controlling the varactor, which actually determines the swing, the voltage controlled oscillator. So you have to set that up, and usually we use the modulation index when the carrier disappears as a marker, which is 2.4 for the modulation index. But
Yeah, I would say this from the stuff that I've read. If you understand modulation index, that concept, then you really understand how FM transmitters and stuff
well, if you
work.
don't understand it, you never passed my course when I was teaching it that way.
Well, I tried to
As I said,
understand it as a kid. I could
that.
pass all the classes. I mean, I got my extra license when I was 15 years old. I didn't know a thing. I just memorized answers to questions that were published. I could recite Shakespeare. I didn't know what that meant. So I passed the extra. The hard thing was code, but I passed the extra exam literally without knowing anything. I could draw a schematic of a one-tube Colpitts oscillator with blah, blah, blah. I had no idea what a Colpitts oscillator was. I just knew you draw a circle, you put dots, you know. Pfft. Back then, you just had to pass a multiple choice test. And I passed. And I was happy, but I didn't know a thing. If you said to me, how does a tube work? I'd say, I have no idea.
If you go to the MARC website under repeaters, you'll see the spectrum of our FM repeater, actually, as it was.
Cool. All right, so I hope that kind of complemented what Jeremy was saying. You can look at signals on graphs, graphical analysis, or these little tiny spectrum analyzers, and it's kind of fun to poke around and see what happens. I could do that, but I bet we better stop. I can get my transmitter here, a 14706, and send you all kinds of digital signals. You can hear them on the repeater. They won't break the repeater. But if you looked at the RF spectrum while I'm sending it, you could see how the information gets encoded into the RF. So FM is kind of fascinating. I don't know how Armstrong figured this out, but we should thank him. Jeremy, back to you.
No, so I actually learned something new that in AM, the way I was understood is 100 watts is 100 watts, and as you put more energy into the sidebands, it actually took from the carrier.
No, it's the opposite. I knew because the modulation transformers were huge on the DX100. So if I went hello and looked at an RF power meter, it went up to 150 watts. Hello. And then as I stopped, it went back to 100 watts with no modulation. So I kind of knew from both the light bulb got brighter when I shouted, but it was on AM, properly modulated AM, the carrier pair never goes up or down. So in other words, the whole tank circuit and all has to be built for, in fact, I think the maximum power on AM, I think this is right, the maximum power is 4 times the carrier power. I think that's right. Because you double the voltage, right? In the modulator, you double the voltage, and energy is V squared, power is V squared. So the maximum instantaneous PEP output of an AM signal is 4 times the carrier. I think that's right.
Yeah, with a modulation index of 1.
Yes.
So your peak power is 4 times.
Yep.
I think average power is 1.5.
Yeah.
You get 6-7% in the carrier and 33% in the sidebands.
Yep. All right. We're going beyond our original talk here, but yeah, it's kind of fun. Modulation's fun to understand, and really it wasn't until I was retired and started to dig into it a little bit that I thought I might have started to understand it. You know, you can build a radio and talk people all over the world and still know nothing. I did. I was 15 years old.
Other questions? It's like everybody's ready for the test.
Yeah, or to watch. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Barry.
This should be a pretty horrendous State of the Union address.
Thanks, Barry. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
I tried. It's a tough topic. That's a tough topic.
Very
Jim?
nice.
Thank you, Jim.
Very good. I liked it.
Yeah, very good. Good job, Barry.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let me shut down the YouTube here. So we'll say goodnight.